Last time, despite being arrested for heresy in 519, the radical monk Gorino continued to gain followers, as he continued to preach his doctrine of 5 rings and 5 clans. While the Daidoji family was busy being consumed by a blood feud, he managed to gain the support of several prominent daimyo, including the Lion Clan champion, who commissioned the creation of a monastery for the new Order of the 5 Rings, a sect dedicated to Gorino's teachings. We resume the story in the year 525, the year that one of Gorino's first prominent followers, Isawa Amiku, became Elemental Master of the Void. We are given no information as to the other 4 elemental masters contemporaneous with Amiku, though it seems from what little details are available, Amiku's arrogance and overbearing personality seems to have made him a dominant figure within the Phoenix clan, as he essentially dragged his clan with him into serving the cause of Gorino. The monk was no doubt very pleased with himself, now that he had effectively 2 great clans in his pocket. Meanwhile, peasant revolts and religious strife continued to rack the empire, especially in the lands of the Scorpion and Crane clans, the 2 so-called clans of air. Gorino himself had proclaimed that these 2 clans must become one, or balance to the empire will never be restored and troubles will only continue. The peasants, it seems, were especially eager to believe Gorino's preachings, and such was the chaos that his believers unleashed upon the lands of these 2 great clans that despite their obvious opposition to the idea, neither the Crane nor the Scorpion was in any position to really do anything about him. But Gorino's heresy had done more than just unleash peasant uprisings. It was causing schism within the Brotherhood of Shinsei itself, as the various sects and subsects began to inflict acts of violence upon one another, depending on whether or not they aligned with Gorino's beliefs. As chaos and unrest racked the empire from end to end, a new existential threat emerged from the Shadowlands. An army of Shadowland monsters bigger than anything ever chronicled in the history of the Empire began to assault the borders of the Crab Clan. The main thrust of its advance was targeted at the seat of the Kuni family. Now, in the sources, this is identified as Shirokuni, and indeed the conflict is called the Siege of Shirokuni. However, according to other sources, Shirokuni was built centuries later to replace the original Kuni seat, Kyuden Kuni. So I'm going to assume that this is an oversight on the part of the guys who wrote down the original source books, so I'm going to refer to this as the Siege of Kyuden Kuni. At any rate, the siege was a dire one. If the defenses of Kyuden Kuni failed, the Shadowland hordes could simply breeze over it and then enter the heart of Crab territory, and thus into the Empire proper. Desperate to prevent this terrible outcome, Kuni daimyo Kuni Watabe, one of the first prominent followers of Gorino, reached out to the monk with a desperate plea for aid. Gorino was not slow in responding. With passion and verve, he raised a massive army of monks and peasants and led them southwards to aid the Crab Clan in this desperate hour. The fighting at Kyuden Kuni was savage, as wave after wave of fanatical peasants threw themselves at the monsters of the Shadowlands. And wave after wave, they died. But in the end, they prevailed. Its strength sapped by immense losses, the Shadowland forces retreated. Rokugan was once again secure. Understandably, Gorino no doubt expected the Crab Clan to be sympathetic to him as thanks for his assistance. Perhaps they might even join his cause as the Lion and Phoenix clans had. In this, he was to be proven profoundly wrong. For in Crab Clan territory resides a small but highly martial sect of the Brotherhood of Shinsei known as the Temple of Osanowo, named after the Crab Clan's second champion, son of the Kami Hida himself, who, after his death, became the Fortune of Fire and Thunder. Thus, despite being a small sect, the Temple of Osanowo held great sway among the Crab Clan, whose samurai regard Osanowo as a figure of great reverence. An abbot of the Order of Osanowo named Dogen persuaded Crab Clan champion Hida Oshu that unless Gorino and his followers were expelled from Crablands immediately, the Fortune would turn his back on the Crab Clan and wreak terrible vengeance upon them. This seemed a convincing argument to Hida Oshu, who did exactly as Dogen suggested. Unfortunately, this only served to throw more fuel on the religious fire. Word of what Dogen and Hideyoshi had done resulted in yet another outbreak of sectarian violence, this time between the Shintoists, one of the largest sects of the Brotherhood of Shinsei, and the Order of the Seven Fortunes, one of the oldest religious orders in all of the empire. The Fortunists, as they were sometimes known, predated even the fall of the Kami, as they emphasized reverence for the Seven Fortunes as an aid to achieving enlightenment. It's never mentioned exactly why these two factions fell out, nor is it said which side was sympathetic to Gorino and which was opposed to him. However, the violence between the two sects became so severe that even the Dragon Clan, for a change, broke its traditional neutrality and sent peacekeepers to try and defuse the situation. As if that wasn't bad enough, another disaster occurred in the year 528, which also happened to be the year that the Monastery of the Five Rings, commissioned by Akodo Kento, Gorino's greatest supporter, was completed. While the Dragon Clan had been distracted by the violence between the Fortunists and the Shintoists, they suddenly woke up one day to find that one of their provinces had been taken over by blood speakers. Led by a peasant Maho Tsukai named Chikako, they managed to take over a sizable chunk of dragon borderlands and proclaimed it the Crimson Kingdom, with Chikako as their queen. It's never mentioned exactly which province they managed to take over, but that doesn't really matter because, unfortunately, the fate of the Crimson Kingdom is pretty anticlimactic. Yet another result of it being a detail that was likely included in a sourcebook just for context, instead of being fleshed out as a proper story arc in its own right. 1 year after its creation, and Chikako decided that it would be a great idea for the forces of the Crimson Kingdom to start launching attacks beyond its borders upon the other provinces of the empire, which, as you might imagine, got everyone's attention and resulted in a combined army of Dragon, Phoenix, and Imperial Legion forces to wipe out the Crimson Kingdom almost as quickly as it had started. Chikako was caught and killed, as well as most of the other Maho Tsukai, though of course a few escaped like the rats they are. Most blood speakers may not be all that good at actually taking over the empire, but they are certainly very good at running for cover. In fairness, being a blood speaker means that you're dabbling in Maho, and Maho tends to have a corrupting influence upon the sanity of its users, so it really isn't that surprising that the leaders of the Crimson Kingdom would do something this irrational. Still an anti-climax, though. 2 years following the fall of the Crimson Kingdom was the year 531 of the Empire, and it would prove a turning point in the Heresy of the Five Rings. In that year, Kuniwatabe, one of the first daimyo to throw his support behind Gorino, was challenged by Ugoye, a monk of the Order of Osanowo, to a wrestling match. If we recall, the Order of Osanowo was firmly opposed to the Order of Five Rings, and it was upon this ideological basis that the challenge was issued. Apparently, Watabe accepted this challenge only to slip and break his neck during the bout. Ugoye was murdered soon thereafter by vengeful adherents of the Order of Five Rings, who then proceeded to burn down several temples loyal to the Fortunist sect. This is the only evidence suggesting that in the schism between the Fortunists and the Shintoists, that the Fortunists were anti-Gorino and the Shintoists may have been pro-Gorino. Just like that, the radical monk had lost a prominent follower, as well as any support he may have had among the samurai of the Crab Clan. The second loss came later that year. Isawa Ameku, the insufferably arrogant elemental master of the void, had come to greatly dislike and mistrust Akodo Kento, champion of the Lion Clan and the other prominent follower of Gorino. Whereas Ameku genuinely believed in Gorino's teachings, he suspected, correctly as it happened, that Kento was mostly using the monk and the Order of the Five Rings movement for his own agenda. So it was that Ameku decided that despite the fact that the Monastery of the Five Rings was in Lion Lands, that it should be controlled by the Phoenix clan. And with the backing of a Phoenix army and his own mastery of the Void, the most powerful and dangerous of the elements, Ameku was convinced that the Lion couldn't stop him from taking it. Naturally, the Lion were not about to surrender control of the monastery without a fight. The battle could have gone either way, but during the initial assault, Ameku attempted to use his powers only to lose control of them, and found himself staring into the heart of the void. The Elemental Master broke down completely, the Phoenix army lost heart, and was routed. Amiku spent weeks in a state of near madness, wandering aimlessly in the wilderness until he found refuge in a temple of one of the seven fortunes, specifically Fukurokujin, the Fortune of Wisdom. Not only did the Isawa Shugenja regain his sanity, he also seemed to have discovered enlightenment, realizing that his great folly had been his focusing on the void to the exclusion of all else. He had lost perception of the oneness with all things. After this revelation, Amiku returned to Kyuden Isawa and promptly resigned as Elemental Master of the Void. And so Gorino had lost yet another supporter. As if to add insult to injury, Amiku then proceeded to join the Order of the Thousand Fortunes, one of the sects that might have been opposed to him. However, Amiku seemed to be kindly disposed towards Gorino. His new enlightenment allowed him to see what he perceived as a hole in his soul, and he tried to convince his former ally that he was walking the wrong path. Of course, Gorino rebuffed him. He would not be dissuaded that his conviction of 5 rings, 5 clans was wrong. Still, without Amiku, the Phoenix clan now switched from being an ally of the monks to an opponent. Now, only the Lion clan stood with him, and for all their prestige and power, the Lion were still only one clan against 5. Because at this point, even the Dragon clan was becoming openly opposed to him, which you could argue is a remarkable achievement on its own. But then the year turned. 532 of the Empire saw the sudden death of Hante XII after another remarkably short reign, and the accession of his son, Hante XIII. But where his father had merely been kindly disposed towards Gorino, it turned out that the new emperor was a full-throated supporter of the monks' movement, something that he affirmed by appointing Gorino to the position of Imperial advisor. After the disappointments and setbacks of the previous year, this seemed like a sign from the heavens themselves. What did it matter if the other great clans were opposed to Gorino, now that the emperor himself was in his corner? The monk's star was at its greatest height, but of course this event wouldn't be called the Heresy of the 5 Rings if it didn't eventually come crashing down. And in the final video, we will see exactly how that happened. Until then, before there was Ellen Ripley, before there was Wonder Woman, there was the original action heroine, Atalanta. Now available in ebook, paperback, and audio form. Links in the description.